Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you're enjoying these episodes, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss out on any episodes. Today, I'll be talking with John Baker, former major league player, caught for many years in the big leagues with 3 different teams. So I'm excited to chat with him today. He is now a mental skills coach with the Chicago Cubs. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things, bring up some stories that will hopefully make you laugh. But if you are enjoying these episodes, and if you individually feel like you need a little help on the mental side and want to look at my online course, make sure you go visit mentaledge.training, where I personally help young student athletes through this whole process of building mindset, working on their personal skills. But enjoy this episode with John Baker. We'll see you on the inside. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Chad Hermansen here. Today we got a special guest, a former teammate of mine. Last year I played was in Albuquerque in 2007, and this amazing individual was on my team, John Baker. Bake, how's it going, dude? How we doing?
It's going well. We are locked down here in the greater Phoenix area and enjoying the family time, actually.
Nice. Well, we want to, the first thing that stands out to me, we have to acknowledge the amazing mustache that you have right now. You were always a clean-shaven guy, kind of prim and proper, always looking good. But this is going above and beyond. This is actually, when we started the call, this makes me really happy.
Well, thank you first of all for having me on and being able to put me in front of the people that you work with. I'm really happy to share what I have. My mustache is also happy to share what it has as well. This mustache started. It's got a mental skills background. So my mentor for a couple of years in working for the Cubs was Ken Ravizza. Kenny always wore a mustache. He's one of the fathers of sports psychology. And last year, and we'll get into this, but at the beginning of this year, I took a position to be the full-time mental skills coach in Chicago with the Cubs. And in doing so, I was thinking about ways to honor Kenny, not just with his message. And so I grew a mustache in January. Well, that was supposed to be for the first couple of days of spring training, but my youngest daughter, Fiona, who's 6, she just loves it. So at any talk about cutting the mustache off, she gets really upset. And you know what we are as parents is we're here for our children. And so my mustache is here for my youngest.
Oh, it's amazing. No, you got to keep it. Did she comb it at all?
They got me a little, it looks like a switchblade and you click the button, but it's a comb when it pops up. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, yeah, exactly. I wanted to bring you on because you just mentioned Ken Ravizza. We're gonna get into the mental side of things here, but I want my audience to know who is John Baker, and I'll introduce you in that regard. Where you were a 4th-round pick by Cal Berkeley out of college, and then you played with a couple of big league teams with the Marlins, the Padres, and the Cubs. Finished with the Cubs, and then probably obviously that transition with those relationships to where you are now. But before we get started, okay, I was reluctant if I'm going to share the story or not, because I think it's one of the funniest stories that I have personally ever experienced. And so we're in AAA, and I'm just going to dive into it with you. We're in AAA. We are on a flight. I can't even remember where we are, but we're on a layover somewhere. And obviously, you get off the airplane, maybe you go get a bite to eat. Everyone's got to go to the bathroom. So I'd gone to the bathroom. Number one, I'm washing my hands, and here comes John Baker. Here comes you walking into the bathroom, and I'm washing my hands. He's like, "Hey, what's up, Herman? Hey, what's up?" And you're like, "Watch this." And you go over to the urinal, and you start going number 1, and you put your pants all the way to the ground like you're a 2-year-old schoolboy.
Yeah.
And for your bare butt, for everybody to see, we're in an airport that's very busy, congested, and I'm now washing my hands for probably 30 seconds to a minute, just kind of watching, like, laughing hysterically, watching all these businessmen walk in and being like, like they saw a ghost. So tell me about that story. Is that the only time you've done that, or is that your thing? Do you do that?
No, that was not the only time, and that wasn't necessarily my thing either. You know how it is. I mean, and I think Herm, what you're referencing is like the AAA, especially, like, people have these perceptions of what professional baseball is like, and you don't. Human beings, when you're faced, similar to the times that we're in now, when we're faced with struggle, when we're faced with difficult times and things that kind of suck, we tend to get closer. And a lot of times the way we get closer is through humor. And when I played in Sacramento in AAA with the A's, our radio personality is a guy named Johnny Dasco. And he was always doing ridiculous things in the airport to make us laugh, to kind of soften the burden of what we were all going through. And that was, I think, a hallmark of that Isotopes team that we were on. We were just a group of people who recognized where we're all at these different stages in our career. We were all coming from, AAA is the level where it's like the mercenaries are all coming in together. And we just had that group of people, John Gall, Scott Siebel, all these people that were approaching everything with like fun and laughing and having a good time. And so that was something that I'd seen before, that when those layovers get tough and you find yourself in the Houston Hobby Airport looking for a Starbucks, and for me at the time, hoping you have enough money to be able to buy a $5 drink, right? Being able to make everybody laugh goes a long way. And I think that humor is a way to connection for a lot of us. And I don't think I was thinking about it in those terms while it was happening, but as I look back on it now, it sounds a whole lot better than me just being willing to pull my butt cheeks out in public.
Oh man, it is so funny. I remember specifically, there's some things you share with your wife or and your significant another at the time, but I remember calling, I was like, babe, I just saw one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Well, they got a picture of it. That was the other thing people need to know.
Yes.
Somebody got a photograph of it, and this was like really good camera phones, like it wasn't posted on Instagram yet because it didn't exist. But someone got a picture of it, and then they blew it up, and then it was up in the bathroom in our home bathroom for everybody to see. So
you became the mascot of the team. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I wanted to share that story with you, and I did some things too. I remember the Billy Bob teeth. This was in '98, going through the airport. I'd stick in some Billy Bob teeth and just walking around, and you're going in the escalator back and forth, and you're just like, hey, how's it going? And people are just like, give you the weirdest look. So it's totally fine. And you gotta, the grind to AAA, getting up at 4 a.m. to get on those 6 o'clock flights. It gets long, it gets hard, but those are the best stories. So I wanted to share that before we got started.
Hey, and I think it's a good transition too for me to talk a little bit about my backstory, because I did play in the major leagues, and I did spend a lot of time. I played 14 professional seasons, 7 of those in the big leagues. But I think it's important to point out that all of that for me, for 18-year-old me in high school, was a bonus. It was all a bonus. I went to school to go to school first, and I loved playing baseball, but I wasn't as good as everybody else was in high school. And I was fortunate enough my senior year of high school to have my coach, ask me in a very direct way that I have to admit initially hurt my feelings. But he asked me, he said, is there something wrong with your eyes? Because when we take batting practice in the cage, or we throw you batting practice, he's like, you got the best swing on the team. You hit the ball the hardest, you hit it the farthest, but when it comes in the game, you swing and miss so often that I'm concerned about your eyes. And I took that personally at first, like, oh, he doesn't like me, But then I thought about it and said, well, maybe I should go see an optometrist and make sure that I can see. So up to that point, for some reason, all of my vision checks had been at the pediatrician when I was going on my regular checkups, and I had it kind of memorized, I guess. So when I went and did my vision test at an optometrist, I found out that I wasn't supposed to even be legally driving with how bad my vision was. So I was hitting 300 in high school, and I thought at the time that you had to guess ahead of time if they were going to throw a curveball and try to swing lower than where you saw the ball. Like, I didn't see spin or anything like that. So now we're like halfway through my senior year of high school, and I get glasses. And the first at bat that I had with those glasses on, I hit a homer to dead center field on the first pitch I saw. And my world kind of changed at that point. I joined a summer baseball team that I wasn't intending on joining. I had one scholarship offer, but it was a 50% scholarship to go to Pepperdine and be a relief pitcher. And I threw like 84 miles an hour, and I didn't like pitching, to be honest with you. Like, I just didn't like that. I didn't like that role. I liked hitting better. I liked playing in the field, being part of the team like that. And so I said no. And I was just going to go to UCLA and go to college. I wanted to do political science. I wanted to go to law school. I had this whole, man plans and God laughs, right? I had this whole career trajectory planned out of what I was going to do. And it all changed with a phone call. Dave Esker, who was the assistant at Pepperdine that had recruited me to be a pitcher, called me and said, hey, I just got the head job at Berkeley. It's not public yet, but I'd like you to come here. And I'm like, well, I haven't applied. School starts in 2 weeks. I already sent my deposit for my dorm in UCLA, like, and I thought about it for a while. I said, he wanted me to come and walk on and try out for the team. And so I'm like, Cal's a great school, and I wonder if I get priority registration. I can pick the classes that I want so that was the deal. That was my scholarship, if you will, to start my college career. Was he told me, yeah, if you come here, even if you don't make the team, I promise that your freshman year you'll get priority registration to the classes that you want. Right. So I said yes. I walked on at Berkeley. By the middle of my sophomore year, and I never caught before. I was a catcher in professional baseball. I walked on. I'd never caught before. Halfway through my sophomore year, once the conference season started, we played USC. Mark Pryor was the star pitcher there at the time, famous Mark Pryor. And the Saturday game, I started catching, and I didn't stop being the starting catcher until the end of my career there at that point. So it took me a year and a half to earn a starting position in college. My junior year, I won the batting title in was the Pac-10 at that time, Pac-12 now, won the batting title, and I got drafted by the A's. And I was so unaware that I was on anybody's radar that I didn't have an agent, or they called me. I remember them calling me, and I had to call my dad to ask him. I'm like, hey, how much should I tell them? Some teams are interested in drafting me. Can you believe that? And he's like, no, And I'm like, no, they really are. Like the Reds called me and the Yankees called me, and just got a phone call from the A's, and they said they're intending to draft me in this certain position if I'll accept this money. Should I take it? And he's like, absolutely. That's worth plenty to buy away your senior year of college. And so it was all a bonus. And I think that approaching baseball like a bonus allows us to keep that element of fun involved that we're talking about when we're taking our pants off in the airport, in the Houston Hobby Airport, or figuring out different ways to have fun, because baseball is so filled with failure, especially for offensive players, that it can really drag people down and make you feel sad and bad and like you stink. So having that element of fun, but keeping it like it's a bonus, like we're lucky, not like I have to go practice or I have to go do this, but I get to. Like, I'm fortunate enough that I'm in a position where I can keep playing. I can still play. After my senior high school, I joined a summer team only because they were going to Hawaii. And it was included in the cost of being on the team, a ticket to Hawaii and a hotel room and 10 days there. So it was like my senior trip. And so I joined that team, and in saying yes to that and like doing that, that's where that coach that ended up being the head coach at Cal, who's now the head coach at Stanford, that's the team that he saw me play for and hit for, and said, I think you could probably hit in Division I. So kudos to Dave Esker for recognizing what I didn't even see in myself. Sometimes we got to listen to the people that tell us those things, but that started me on that path. And so I got to pro ball, and even though I didn't get to the big leagues right away, I think one thing that was really consistent for me my whole minor league career was I approached it as a bonus. Like, I was having fun. I was getting to play with these guys. By the time you and I played together in 2007, now I had played with guys like you that had played in the big leagues, and I thought, wow, he's been in the big leagues and this guy's been in the big leagues, and like, maybe I can actually do this. Maybe I can actually get there. So I had this dream as a kid of playing Major League Baseball. But that dream kind of turned into just an appreciation of all the things that I was lucky enough to be a part of. And that kind of helped, I think, maintain the longevity of my career. So after moving forward after that, I got called up in 2008, played every day in 2008, 2009, had really good seasons both of those years. And then I was hit with another obstacle in 2010. My arm didn't work right, and we couldn't figure it out. It took a long time, and I missed most of the season that year, and found out at the end of the year I had to have an elbow reconstruction. I'd broken my arm, didn't know I broke my arm. It had damaged a bunch of the ligaments, like the Tommy John ligament, and it damaged the ulnar nerve. And so I had this massive surgery at the end of 2010, and I wasn't all the way back to 2011. But again, just like having the bonus time of playing, coming back after like a really serious injury like that and getting back to the big leagues, it all felt like a new and different experience that I could appreciate. And that's the way I approached my whole career until it ended in 2015 in the minor leagues with the Mariners. I got to go play in the whole National League, be housed out of the National League West, the National League East, the National League Central, tour all the baseball stadiums and play against guys in a lot of spots where like guys I'd played in video games with, or guys that were my heroes. I got to like share the field with them. And it was such an amazing and transformative experience that when I got done playing, I knew that I wanted to stay involved, but I didn't know exactly how to do that. And so fortunate in 2016 to get a job in the front office with the Cubs, working for Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer and learning how the business of baseball works. And then smart enough at the end of that year to realize that I didn't want to wear a suit and be an executive and be the person that put people on different rosters and crush people's dreams. I wanted to be somebody that was on that support system to help people, help the guys that are striving, because I know what it feels like to fail. I know what it feels like to get sent down. I know what it feels like to get hurt and miss time. And I know that I took lessons away from all of those experiences that I could pass on to people that were in a similar situation. And baseball gave so much to me that initially the work for me was trying to figure out how I could best give back. And that started with mentorship. And then now that's transferred into what I do now, which is a mental skills coach for a major league team.
That's incredible, man. Something you said earlier that really stood out to me was kind of really a practice of gratitude. Was I don't have to go do something, I get to, right? And just that's a mantra that a lot of people talk about and say, and something I try to practice certainly every day of I get to do these things. So I know a lot of times, and it's something that stood out to me too, is with your eyesight, is for like you young high school kids out there, make sure you're getting your eyes checked every single year, right? Get it checked every year. I tell that to any kid that because I had horrible eyes. I started wearing glasses when I was 12. I've had LASIK surgery twice. I don't know if that's even possible, but but obviously you can't see. If you can't see, you can't hit it. So you gotta start there, and all the physical tools, the mental things kind of come a little bit after that too, and obviously all combined together. So let's talk about, you mentioned Ken Ravizza was a big mentor of yours. Was that a part of when you were in college, or was that on the pro side of things?
That wasn't until after I got done playing. So Joe Madden managed the Cubs from 2015 through last season, and Kenny was Joe's right-hand man. He was always on site, and he was a consultant, I guess, technically with our organization, but he was very involved with our major league team. And by 2018, I found myself working side by side with him. Worked a lot together in 17. I kind of learned from him. And so I didn't have any education in performance psychology, but I had like I was a phone call away from the guy that was writing the articles and was teaching it at Cal State Fullerton, and had been in baseball for, I think at that point, maybe 40 years he'd been in baseball. So being able to learn from Ken, and I will say that there's a couple things that I really took away from my experience working with Kenny before he passed in July of 2018. But the first thing is in my role now, and the thing that Kenny really expressed, I think that it's important for everybody to understand this, is always to look at the athlete and the performer as a whole person. Sometimes our performance on the field is affected by things off of the field. And sometimes our performance off of the field is affected by things on the field. And so trying to having such a narrow lens of viewing ourselves only as a baseball player, like if we're a high school or college player and we live and die by our success and failure, that's not doing justice to who we are as people. And the same thing from a practitioner standpoint. If I'm only looking at you as a player from what you're doing on the field, I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and I'm missing everything that's underneath the water that leads to that point that culminates in the things that we see expressed on the field. And so that was the thing that Kenny always talked about, viewing the performer as a complete person, digging deeper, finding out more about who they are as people will sometimes unlock performance in ways that aren't necessarily in the textbook. And then the second thing that I really took away from my experience with Ken was his idea that failure is the fertilizer of growth. I've always kind of lived that without having that simple statement to describe it. And it really helps because failure is not necessarily a bad thing. Failure is feedback. And it's feedback for us to take, digest, and then use that information to transform ourselves into something better than we just were. But man, it sounds easy when we say it. But when you and I were playing, we both know that, man, it does not feel good to fail. And that's the final point from Ken, which was, I think, and this is a lesson that everybody can take away, which is you don't have to feel good to perform well. We often think that, but Kenny would say it all the time. He would tell the major league players, are you that weak?
Yeah.
Are you that weak that you have to feel a certain way to perform? No, you are the best you're the best in the world at this. You don't have to feel any way other than prepared. And if you feel prepared, doesn't matter how heavy that bat feels or how heavy the ball feels, or you can't get the grip that you want. you're going to be able to do it because you're the best in the world. And so those three things were just a massive influence on what I do now. And they come from long phone conversations and time spent together watching baseball with Ken Ravizza.
That's great. How does that working as a mental skills coach now? So you're with the Cubs. Are you working with both the big leaguers and the minor leaguers? And whatever side you're working on, whether it's both, what does that look like? Is it individual work? Is it more teamwork? How does that play out?
So we have a mental skills team, but I'm our major league coach. So I'm with our major league team during the season, but before the season starts. So things like mini camp for the minor league players that happened in January. I think this year we ran, and it was a new kind of move, but player development ran our instructional league, which has traditionally for years in baseball happened after the season ended in January to try to help people get ready. And so I contribute to that part of it. So we do a kind of combination of like one-on-one interviews. We do an educational series, and then we also lead and guide training and practices. So we're there and we're available, and our office as a group is set up right in the middle of everything. So the way our complex is set up, you have a major league side and a minor league side, but they're all in the same building, and you have a cafeteria and a theater right in the middle. And out of the cafeteria door and out of the theater door, there's the mental skills office. And so there's 4 of us. I'm fortunate now for the last 2 years now, to work very closely and be mentored by Bob Tewksbury, former player who wrote a book called 90% Mental, who's done this work for the last 20 years, went and continued his education. And he's been a wonderful resource and mentor for me now. He's 20 years older than I am, pitched for 13 years in the major leagues. And so I have Tukes to bounce ideas off of and work with. And we kind of look at him like our senior advisor.
Yeah.
And then we have 2 practitioners that tour the minor leagues and work with all the minor league players during the season. But in spring training, after the season, a lot of us and I live in Arizona, so I can access the complex really easily. We all work together. So if we have, and the guys that I work with, truthfully too, they're definitely more qualified and probably better at this job than me. They just don't have the as recent playing experience. So another one we have, David De Silva, worked at IMG for a long time. You're talking about a certified mental performance consultant with 20 years of practice working with different age groups of kids, different cultural demographics as well. He's from South Africa. So I have those guys to kind of keep me in line and make sure that I'm sticking with good science when I'm doing my work. And it's not just the bro science I like to bring to a lot of things, like this worked for me once, man.
Right. Yeah.
They're there to put that in check. And so I get to learn from them, and we consult. And now as we're shifting to this new dynamic of life after COVID and what the baseball season may look like, we are really going to try to service the players that are playing, our major league players and whoever else is playing in this way as a team. And so when players have concerns or they have questions about different elements of mental skills, I'm the touch point for our major league players. But if it's something like goal setting or imagery practice, I can then direct them to our practitioner that has the expertise in that particular skill, and then they can train them. So I think that that's the future of this line of work, is like a comprehensive team behind these performers, as opposed to one person like me. I mean, last year our payroll in the big leagues was $237 million for 25 people, and having just one person. And let's also frame this with the most conservative estimates in the literature. This is from Weinberg and Gould, but when skill is relatively equal at the highest level in the world, the most conservative estimate suggests that 50% of performance fluctuation is psychological in nature. 50%, that's half. Half of the ups and downs come from our head, not from our body. And I would argue, and I think you probably would too, in baseball, it is more than that. It's absolutely more than that, because we have time in between what happens in the game. And in that time and in that space, we are narrative-driven animals, right? So we can just drum up some incredible story about how we're going to be unsuccessful, or about why we shouldn't succeed, or even why we will be successful, that has nothing to do with what we need to be focused on in the moment, which is, if you're a hitter, it's something generally as simple as like, oh, this guy throws sinkers, I got to see the ball up out of his hand. Or, oh, this guy throws a lot of breaking balls, right? So I got to make sure that I actually see it at a high enough angle for me to swing. So it's just like, see it up out of the hand, or it's getting my foot down on time. It's always one simple little anchor to the moment that helps us execute that technique that we practiced. And those stories tend to get in our way. So it's just really important to learn about, we can get into this further later, but coming back to the present moment. And I'm fortunate, so fortunate as somebody that works, to have all of these people supporting me that help us give this message to players, and teach them the evidence-based mental skills in a systematic way.
Well, to me, that makes so much sense if you're a big league team to have a person like you, maybe someone like that has actually studied or has that degree, right, in psychology. You kind of mix and match and put it all together, where you come from the player standpoint, obviously with a lot of knowledge, skill and strategy and tools that you can implement with a player. And there's probably something in there where a player, I think at the end of the day, a player wants to know, like, hey, can you help me? Right. And whether you played or not, I'm sure you probably have some ease in your conversation with the player because you've been there, done that. And how is that relationship? Like you said, you're with the big league team every day. When you get out to the field, when you get into the dugout, is like, oh, Baker's here again. Like, what is it?
Probably.
But I'm saying, like, is there something you talk about every single day, or do you kind of let the player come to you?
Yeah, so we definitely give space, especially with our major league players. You give them space. Now, I will say this, from the last few years, watching these guys play, watching these guys win the World Series, I learned so much in observation. Like, and I think sometimes that's the role of the practitioner in our role, is to watch people perform really well, so that when they get off the trail for a second, like when they get off track, you have those fresh eyes to be able to look at it. Now, if you're constantly trying to intervene and constantly trying to fix and constantly trying to change things with people, your act's going to get tired really fast. And so it's more of a guidance kind of role and perspective. So while we may do mandatory interviews or mandatory meetings with the players in spring training, during the season, it's a much more fluid position where we're there, we're accessible, but we're not necessarily proactive in a sense that I'm not going to go grab somebody like Anthony Rizzo and tell him how he needs to think or what he needs to do, but I am there for him if he needs the resource. Now, the minor leagues are generally much different, obviously, because now we're developing people to try to get them to the big leagues. Like, not that development ends once you reach the major leagues, it just becomes harder to induce, because with celebrity, with success, people become more resistant to changing and trying new things because they want to stick with what got them there. And that's completely understandable. And you don't want to place any doubt in somebody's mind of why they're successful. If they think it's because they eat 4 bananas at 2:30 p.m. on a Friday that they're going to get hits next week, and you're the mental skills coach and you get to the ballpark that day and you realize that there's only 3 bananas, maybe that day your job is to get the 4th one and make sure that it's in the right place, and then just walk away and not take any credit for it. And I think that a lot of these skills, for me personally, ways of conversation, the idea of guidance as opposed to fixing, those things came from my experience catching. Because when you're a catcher in professional baseball or college baseball or high school baseball, your thought process about how the game is going needs to be that of like a servant mentality. You need to be thinking about, what do I need to do? What do I need to say to the pitcher to get him to be able to execute? And so my whole career up to that point, up to the point of doing this line of work, was half of the time, besides me being hyper-focused about what I was doing in the batter's box, but the rest of the time I was only concerned with, what pitch am I going to call? How's he doing? What can he do right now? So cultivated empathy over a long period of time, working with people as they sought high performance. That's what a catcher does for a pitcher. We're like their guide in the same way. And so I've been able to utilize a lot of just my natural way of being that was cultivated by catching in my current position. And now I can just apply those same kind of ideas with position players and pitchers alike.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like you see so many catchers become big league managers, right? Because you're so involved in that pitch to pitch, where I remember, if we're talking about the Cubs, I remember standing in the outfield and at Wrigley Field, and whether you're playing, as I played as a visitor and a home player, people are yelling at you, like they're telling you how much you suck, or maybe hey, great catch, something positive, but usually it's negative, unless you're like Sammy Sosa or something like that. But yeah, having that play to play, pitch to pitch mentality as a catcher, that's so big, that's huge.
They're the only guys, catchers are the only people that are viewing the field from the position from that they are, like the hitter, So you're looking out playing, and you can see how everybody's lined up. You're constantly thinking about strategy, but then you're also balancing that psychological element of what kind of mind state the pitcher needs to be in to be able to execute. Because we know that a pitcher that executes all the time can completely dominate a baseball game. It's the number one priority when you're catching. When I was with the Cubs, my mentor, Tim Cousins, my baseball mentor, ran the catching. He's now the Major League Field Coordinator for the Orioles. So he serves like the kind of the bench coach there. But with Cuz, he had a mantra for our catchers, which was 1 for 4 with 1 for 4 and a win. 1 for 4 and a win. So, we want to get hit every time, but we were more focused getting on base once or twice, but winning the game. And I had Cuz with the Marlins first, and then the Cubs as a player and as a support staff member. I think that's it's an interesting perspective when you think about it, because it's not like seeking this high performance like we think in terms of being positive and shooting high and wanting to do really well offensively, putting somebody else's success above yours as the priority for your team to be able to win the game. It takes the right kind of coaching and teaching to get people there. But it becomes, when you look at the guys that end up spending all this time in the major leagues as catchers, like guys like Jeff Mathis, for example. You're talking about almost, I think, maybe 14 or 15 years now playing. And you look at him and you go, man, there's more years that he's hit under 200 than over 200. Why is he still keep getting jobs? He still keeps getting jobs because when he plays, it gives his team the best chance to win. And at the end of the day, with all these analytics and all this statistical information and all the measurements that we have at the highest levels in the world, baseball is about the team winning and the other team losing. It's about the left-hand column and not what your batting average looks like. So it's also a good way too, if you're struggling at the end of your career, to not worry so much about your offense, because you just want to win, right? And so you win the game, you catch winners, and you get one hit, you can play for a long time.
Yeah, it helps that Mathis is an absolute Gold Glove caliber type catcher behind there. It's just, as a kid, he was an angel forever, and I remember watching him even come up. I was like, this guy. And they kind of quietly did it year in and year out. I was like, this guy is one of the best. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is this? How would you say players at, say, the high school level that like a person like you, that's kind of the head coach's job, right? They're kind of the consultant, the mental skills coach. Mm-hmm. What would you say, and maybe give some advice to that high school kid, or maybe even that young JC or college player, that maybe they should open up a little bit more if they have some things that they want to talk about?
Okay. Well, I think for the cultivating the self-awareness to know what you actually want to talk about, I think is a really good first step for any age group, because there's a relationship between like building up your ability to focus and pay attention and a parallel increase in your self-awareness of how you actually feel. So think about it in terms of a loop. If I can grow more self-aware of how I feel, if I can kind of non-judgmentally step back and go, that makes me feel this way, this makes me feel this way, I'm going to start comparing that to what I think other people might be feeling. And in doing that process of comparing how I feel to how you feel, like, I wonder how Herm's feeling right now, that's me expressing empathy. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're looking for with a team. If we're trying to be able to open up and share how we feel, because vulnerability and transparency, those are the ways to make these kind of breakthroughs where you realize I can let go of that because other people experience it too. I'm not the only one. Now we're a community and a group and a team. So if I'm a coach of, say, a high school team or a JC team, I'm doing my best to not only lead with vulnerability, to be willing to say, I don't know, to be willing to have the players' input on how things should be structured and organized. That goes a long way, offering them some choice occasionally, leading with that, but then setting up the environment and providing the opportunity, which is difficult to do, for players to express how they actually feel about things. It's a difficult process, but it pays off. It pays off so much more in the end when people feel more connected. They tend to perform better as a group. I think there's an old proverb. What is it? I think it's African. I'm probably butchering the point of origin here, but it's I may be able to go faster I can go faster alone, but further together. And that's what we're looking for when we think about the context of baseball. It's not about fast starts. It's not about getting hot and having 10 good at bats. It's about being consistent over 500 at bats. It's about showing up every day to practice with the same mentality, attitude, and focus, even when we don't feel like we have it, faking it and bringing it so that we're with our rest of our group, kind of all striving together to do something. That's where the breakthroughs happen, and that kind of selfless attitude. So figuring out a way to cultivate self-awareness. And like I said, that comes from paying attention. Practicing paying attention comes in, for me, the best exercises or the best framework to view that in is in mindfulness practice. So this gets all the way now down to something like meditation, something as simple as meditation, learning how to sit still, how to put your phone away, how to set an intention to focus on one thing and understand that immediately and inevitably you'll be distracted, and then work on bringing your attention back and back and back and back. And I like to say that every time you reorient yourself back from what you didn't want to think about to what you chose to focus on, that's like a bicep curl or a deadlift or whatever weightlifting exercise you want to put in for your ability to focus and pay attention. And if we want to listen to the greats of this industry that we work in now, Peter Haberl, the senior sports psychologist for the United States Olympic Committee, famous quote, "Attention is the currency of performance." What I'm paying attention to is all that matters. Focused on the ball or the cue that I'm getting. Say we could take it from a different sport, football. Focus on the read of the defense in that moment. Paying attention in this non-judgmental way where I'm just open so I can see everything. That comes from mindfulness practice, but so also does self-awareness, and then therefore awareness of other people, which cultivates empathy. So there's little practices that you can do, like sitting down for 12 minutes a day and intending to focus on one thing and returning back, that cost no money, and they have all of these benefits if we're willing to put in the time. And I think that that's another thing that we can talk about a little bit, which is when we're talking about mental skills, skills are things that can be trained and improved. And so if you want to get better mental skills, the formula is very simple, yet it's not easy to follow. The formula is to find somebody that can teach you what those skills are and how to practice them, and then stick to the plan. And then you'll see the improvement in skills. It's just like hitting or throwing. If I said to you, Chad, I want you to get better at hitting. Here, think about this. Think about driving the ball to right center field to the oppo gap, okay? But then I said, all right, you're better at it now. You know, like, yeah, we can use imagery, right? We can close our eyes and use our imagination. And that's wonderful. It activates the same parts of the brain as when we're actually doing it, but it will never supplant or replace actually doing it. And in combination with actually doing it, now it holds real power. If I'm practicing a certain way, focusing on a specific thing, and now I'm also taking the time away from that place to imagine it from my own perspective in my eyes, now I'm getting the repetitions that I'm looking for. So we can't just tell somebody something, we have to teach them. And then I think the final element, at least for me, one of the things that informs my work now is I like to think about it in terms of how can I coach myself out of a job? Like how can I get these people on the right track so that they don't need me anymore? And I think that high school coaches, JC coaches, and college coaches, they probably understand that because they know that they only have their players for a limited time. And so in that limited time, your intention should be to have them leave their time with you with more tools than you had at that same time when you were playing. And that's the final thing I think I'll add on that, which is I always look at the players that are playing now that I'm working with and I go, okay, what did I not have that he has? What are his strengths? First of all, man, I could list all these strengths off. Wow, there's so many good things. Okay, if I were him, what would I want to know about? Put myself in his shoes. I'm going to use empathy to reach this kind of solution. What do I want to know about? Well, this could really help him. Now, how am I going to get him to have that be his own idea with major league players, right? Now, how am I going to guide the conversation in a way where he says, I could really use this as my thing. Oh, perfect. I have the practice for you. I have the practice for you. I have the practice for you. And I think that coaches in high school and junior college and college coaches can look at it like that. Like, look at your player Or if you're an athlete that's out there right now, that is in high school or college, is watching this, that's playing, start to learn how to separate. You're a complete person, so start to learn how to separate who you are from how you play, right? And then you can say, okay, look at this. Here's create a player. Here's create a John over here, but then here's John Baker, the person with the family and stuff. And so create a player over here. He needs to improve this area. He needs to improve that area and this area. So let me write down what he needs to improve. Let me get the practices to go do it. And then I'll go like that. And then I'll check. But when I'm not creative player, when I'm not on the field, I'm going to leave him over there. I'm going to leave him. I'm going to start to compartmentalize. I'm going to separate who I am as a man, who I am as a, maybe I'm a softball player, who I am as a woman. I'm going to separate that from what it is that I'm doing. That gives me a little space for safety to start to analyze it and start to grow and become my own coach, which I think what we all need to do as competitive athletes as we move up the levels is become our own coach. The best coaches are the people that teach kids how to coach themselves, so that when they move beyond, they can hand them off the baton. Now you're in charge. Because if I'm in charge of what I'm doing, I'm going to believe in it a whole lot more than if you or me tell somebody else to do something.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm a big believer in you're your own best coach, and once you kind of get those tools and strategies and you try them, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and start implementing. I think most kids at the high school level, they're just going about their day, maybe going and based off of how they feel. As a hitter, not having really an approach, like you mentioned earlier, this guy's a sinker slider pitcher, and I'm not even looking for the ball up. I'm hoping to hit it, instead of actually having a plan and kind of mentally thinking about what actually is my approach. And that sometimes most hitters don't learn that aspect of the game until pro ball, sometimes even a year or two into pro ball. It's kind of shocking, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you, because you need to have an approach to stick to. I think that in itself is a skill. And I'll use a professional baseball story. Anthony Rizzo, superstar first baseman for the Cubs. When we were teammates in 2014, he recognized that when guys got ahead of him, they didn't throw strikes. And so one day we're in the dugout, I think we're in St. Louis, and he comes over and he's like, watch this. I'm going to auto take until I get 0-2, and then I'm going to auto take until I walk. And I'm like, that's a bad strategy, dude. Like, what if he throws right in the middle? You're not going to hit it. He's like, watch this. I guarantee I walk. And so he goes up. John Lackey was pitching. So he goes up and he takes strike one, strike two, and then he looks in the dugout on 0-2, and he statue takes the next 4 pitches and walks and gets to first base. And I bring that up not because that's a good strategy, but to highlight the commitment to the approach necessary. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily teach too well to younger players, is even if your approach is wrong, right? Even if your approach is wrong, or it might sound ridiculous to somebody else, you compete that day with the swing you bring to the field. And you're going to be more successful in competition if you stick to the approach that you bring and not constantly try to change it all the time based on how you're feeling, So bringing one approach, one cue in your mind, one simple thought to get you through that day's at bat, one focus for you on that day, that's plenty. And learning how to trust and stick to it. Like, the other story I always tell about this is Manny Ramirez, when I was catching and he struck out 2 times in a row. He just took 3 fastballs in a row right down the middle. Then he took another 3 fastballs in a row right down the middle. Then he took strike 1, strike 2 again. And then our pitcher shook, hung a slider, hit a 3-run homer. We lost the game. And I realized after the game, Manny was willing to sacrifice all 4 of his at-bats to wait for one pitch that he wanted to hit. And again, I'm not recommending you use that strategy, but I'm recommending that you develop the ability to stick with your strategy all the way until the end. Like to learn how to maintain that focus on what it is you want to do and be unwavering in that approach and that confidence that you're going to get the job done. That's the way the best in the world tend to do it. And that's something that's not necessarily taught to us when we're young.
Yeah, I know I was taught, like, I'm looking dead red. I'm looking fastball. If I get it, I'm swinging. If something's spinning, I'm going to struggle there. And a guy like myself that had that up and down career that would never be willing to try to let that fastball go, it just didn't quite have that confidence, that discipline, whatever it is. Like, dude, I'm going to be aggressive because that's kind of the only way I know. And And it's interesting because you might be able to do that at some point, maybe in the minor leagues, or maybe fiddle around with a couple of bats because you're playing every day. But you get to that big league level, you're like, I don't know if I can handle that part of it.
Yeah, full commitment is it's full commitment. It's what's necessary. Full commitment, like willing to go. Like they use the analogy in mixed martial arts or in boxing, like the willingness to go out on your shield. Like that's part of striving is failure, and it doesn't feel good to accomplish anything that's easy to accomplish. So going out there and being focused and it's almost like a willingness to fail, but you can cultivate a willingness to fail if you look at failure as feedback and as the fertilizer of growth. Like, especially when you're younger, like we tell our younger players in the minor leagues, like, fail now. I need you to fail now. I need you to fail when you're 12, 14, 16, 18, because I can't have you fail. I can't have you make those same mistakes when you're 23, you're on Wrigley Field, it's September, and we're in a postseason race against the Cardinals. Now I need you to execute. So fail now, learn from the failure, and then come back again and make that minor tweak to the approach until you find the one that seems to work the best for you. And it's an ongoing process, but from a day-to-day operation standpoint, whatever approach you bring that day, I know baseball is a game of adjustments, but learn how to stick with and believe in it, because that's you. That's who you are, and you're only going to play to your optimal level when you're fully yourself playing and you're not somebody else.
Yeah, no doubt. I think too that what you just said too, that I think if you have that mentality of, okay, it's okay to fail, that you're going to take more risks, in regard to doing the things, and just what Manny Ramirez did. Like, I can't even imagine myself having at bats like that in the big leagues.
Neither.
If I did that in the minor leagues, I've been like, oh, maybe I trust myself a little bit more. Maybe I can hit that slider away, or just stuff like that.
Having an open relationship too, I think, with your coaches, because that's another part of all of this. Like, coaches are our collaborators, they're our guides through the things that we're going through. So having an open relationship so that the coach are like verbally open, so that the coach knows like what it is that you're intending to do, and then you can be judged, if you want to say that, on your adherence to what you guys are intending to do that day, as opposed to on the outcome or the result of what happened. If you know that I'm up there looking for a fastball out over the plate when I'm ahead in the count, and you see me take that pitch, right, and you're a hitting coach, and I come back in the dugout after I make an out or whatever happens, maybe I even get a hit on a later pitch, but you can ask them like, hey, we talked about this as your approach today. Tell me what was going on with the third pitch? Like, give me your explanation. They can say, oh, well, my timing just felt wrong, and so I couldn't get the swing off, but that's what I wanted to swing at. And then as the coach, you can say like, that's really good self-awareness to realize that you weren't on time. Like, good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
Give them something positive with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You maintain the approach, even if they make outs. I think that's another part of it too. If we're talking to coaches here for a second, finding that, like, seeing the strengths in your players first, and seeing the things that they did well before. If you can lead with what went well before you go right into trying to fix what went wrong, you're going to get a whole lot more buy-in back from the people, and I think there's good ways to do that. And that's making affirming statements and asking open-ended questions, as opposed to making kind of like domineering statements and asking yes or no questions to players, not, is this what you were doing? More like, tell me about that experience, what it was like for you. Because you seemed really focused right there. I know it didn't work out outcome-wise, but I noticed, man, your level of focus was so intense. You did your pre-pitch routine, you stepped out, you took a breath, you got in the box the same way, you were locked in. I know it didn't work out, but go like walk me through that at bat. And then you get them talking. And then once you get the player talking and the player says something like, I really feel like if I would have stayed committed to that, or if I would have stayed on the fastball, I would have had more success there. And then you can say something as a coach like, so you seem to know what it takes for yourself to do well, huh? Yeah, I do. And now you're starting to build that intrinsic motivation. And that's, I think, the goal for coaches and for players to start to think about, is building the motivation from the inside, as opposed to having somebody have to crack the whip all the time to get you to push harder, to get you to focus. The conversations that we have with players, the conversations that players have with each other and with coaches, the intention should constantly be to build the internal intrinsic motivation for them to do the things they love, pursue mastery, and then be able to be in the mind state to take failure as feedback and learn from it.
Yeah, that's no doubt. I completely agree with that. Being able to have, like, actually you're having a conversation as a coach with your player, and getting them to talk and getting them, and that's the whole awareness part, right? It is like, oh yeah, I did take that, but I was thinking this. So that gets them thinking about how they're actually thinking, and then what their action's going to be after that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's some systems for this too. I think that's the other important thing, you know, like Bob Tewksbury, this has nothing to do with me, but everything to do with him. He tells guys all the time, like, there are 3 questions we should always ask ourselves after something happens in a baseball game, especially when we have time, which is, what was my approach? What happened? And if anything, what am I going to do differently next time?
Mm-hmm.
What was my approach? What happened? And what will I do next time? And those are 3 questions that we can constantly ask ourselves. And I think it's important to, and again, another self-awareness piece, but it's important to consider how emotionally charged those situations can be sometimes for us. We learned baseball as a little kid. So until we have like, and I don't think anybody has ironclad emotional regulation, like baseball always draws us back to that feeling of being really young, but that's when we had no control of our emotions, right? So understanding that it's going to be emotionally charged, and having the self-awareness to maybe step back a little bit and ask that question 15 minutes after the at-bat, as opposed to right after it just happened, when we're seeing red, when we're angry or disappointed. That's not the best time to make adjustments. The best time to make adjustments is after we've given ourselves some space to blow off some steam. Maybe you need to throw your helmet. You know, like that often gets looked at as like such a horrible thing, right? But for me, it's always been something that we should work with and investigate further and deeper with that individual player. Man, this guy seems to get really angry. And as a coach, or even as a player or a teammate of somebody, you can walk over after they've calmed down so you don't get hit with the backfire and say, I notice that when you ground out to the pull side, you get really frustrated. What can you do? What, like, does throwing your helmet, like, does it help you, like, get over it? And if they go yes, then you go, okay, cool, keep doing it. Just make sure you don't hurt anybody. Like, we like to black and white so many things that need further and deeper investigation, that are definitely more gray than just, this is the right way to do things and this is the wrong way to do things. Baseball's been like that for a long time. And I think with people like you and me now into the game that are like focused more on mental performance and coaching, we're starting to realize that there's so many gradients to behavior that we need to learn from. And that every performer, every player out there is an individual that has their own needs and desires, and they're not all the same. We can't put the same system on top of every single person. What works for Chris Bryant may not necessarily work for Anthony Rizzo. And so understanding that, and that every player is like that. Every person is individual and different. It's what makes us unique and beautiful and wonderful. And meeting them on their level and letting them talk about themselves, I think, is a very valuable skill for coaches to cultivate.
That's no doubt. Yeah, in fact, I remember the only place I really saw this was in Pittsburgh. We had a I guess a boxing boxing bag in a separate room where you could take out your frustration on the bag. Basically, that thing would get pelted a little bit. I was a younger player at that time. I was like, I should probably not go in there, but
you weren't allowed to hit the bag.
Yeah, like probably stay out of that, rookie type guy, and let the veterans that are pissed off in there every day do that. But no, maybe that's a release, to just let things go. And so yeah, we could probably all share stories about something, taking your helmet off, throwing it, hurting somebody, maybe taking your bat, swinging it, breaking all the wood where all the helmets are. So learning to control that, but also is that a positive release at some point?
Yeah, learning how to control it or redirect it so that nobody gets hurt. I mean, I can remember I have two very specific instances in my own personal career where this happened. First one was I was in Double-A. It was my first long season. I skipped high A, played made the All-Star team in Low A. Like, oh, I'm going to be in the big leagues in no time, And I go to Double-A, and I get faced with guys that can throw a bunch of breaking balls for strikes now, and the game's just totally different, and I'm struggling. And the low point of that season in 2003, we were playing in Frisco, Texas, and we were blowing out another team, and they brought in a position player to pitch, and I struck out looking on like a 44-mile-an-hour eephus pitch. Now, that's embarrassing, right? Like, I will say that one moment like ruined the rest of my career batting against position players, because it was so traumatic for me that I would get really, like, the most nervous I ever was in a Major League Baseball game was if we were blowing somebody out and they sent like a position player to go warm up. I'd be like, oh my God, I have no chance to get a hit off this
You're
guy.
already in your dome.
Yeah, I'm ruined now. Like, I don't want it to happen. I can remember being relieved. Remember being totally relieved when like the guy in front of me made an out and I didn't have to face the position player. But I came back into the dugout in Frisco and I had the bat. That's when this was 03, right? So the big knobbed bottom bat like Bonds had was popular. So I have this bat with this huge knob on the bottom and I try to throw it into the bat rack. Well, the big knob hits part of the metal bat rack and I hear, ow, and I look over and it's turned into like a shard, like an arrow, and it is sticking into the hitting coach's chest, where I like pierced through his jersey and into his shirt and I stuck him. And I thought, man, I'm never going to throw my bat again. Well, I was wrong, because fast forward another 5 or 6 years and now I'm in the big leagues with the Marlins, and there's one out and runner on third base in a tie game at the end of the game, I think the 8th inning, and I come up to the plate. Now I just got to put the ball in play in the middle of the field to score the run. And I get just like a hanging changeup right down the middle, and I hit the ball 300 feet straight up in the air, right? So I am so upset with myself now, because I know just a lousy fly ball or a dribbler up the middle is going to score this run, and I've just let the team down. So I'm taking this much more personally. So the way the old Marlins Stadium was set up, I had a chair on the end of the dugout, and right behind me was a door back to a bat swing room that had like a tee and a net. And I came in, I grabbed my bat. I was so mad. I just uncorked it and I let it fly into that room, because there was like a bat. As I'm letting go of the bat, here comes the bat boy out of the room around the corner, who now I think Jacob works for the Orlando Magic. He's the equipment manager there now. Right? Jacob Diamond was his name, but he's got a ball, like a bucket of balls, of new balls that he's bringing out. Bat, like the Matrix, goes like somehow like over him and like around his arm and off the wall in the back. And it took me nearly killing 2 people to finally stop reacting so emotionally to what was happening. But I think, again, here I am now, somebody that works in mental skills, that works on things like emotional regulation. And man, I could have really used in those moments, really used the 2020 version of myself to like put his arm around me and pull me to the side and go, hey, let's just take a breath next time.
Right.
Like everyone knows that no one's out there trying to strike out. No one's out there trying to give up home runs. No one's out there trying to make errors. Like, none of us are trying to do that. Everybody's intention on every play is to do the right thing. And we have this impulse to show each other. It's where it comes from, I think. And that's not to be confused with the people who really do get frustrated and like have big, strong, powerful emotions that are difficult to control. And so working with each of those people, again, individually, seeing them as individual people, is just such an important perspective in this work.
That's awesome, man. Those are great stories, and stories you obviously going to always remember, can share with players. And yeah, I almost killed a couple people. It's no big deal, but yeah.
Another good one I have on this one is from Kevin Youkilis, a good friend of mine now, who I work with the Cubs. But he had gotten in remember he got in a fight with Manny because he threw his helmet in the dugout in Boston. And after that moment, he tried to stop how he was reacting. I guess he got pulled aside by Veritek, who kind of yelled at him and told him to grow up and stop being such a child.
Yeah.
And he said he spent the next 2 weeks just holding all of his emotions in, and he was doing really bad. And he wasn't performing up to how he usually does. And David Ortiz, Big Papi, came over to him and he said, hey man, I don't care if you throw the helmets. We need you to get hits.
Yeah.
You do what it takes for you to be successful. And I'm like, well, what'd you do? He's like, started throwing my helmet again. And then I started hitting.
Right. So he kind of stopped caring as much, but it went it went a different route than he wanted it to.
The focus ended up being on something like all of his energy, all of, I always think about it like this. We have like Street Fighter, the video game. We have a meter of how much attention that we can pay to something, how much focus that we have. Mm-hmm. And if we're directing our attention and our energy to things that don't matter, in baseball coming up, they would always tell you, control the things that you can control and don't worry about the rest of the things. Well, that's really hard. But if you look at it like, okay, I can only pay this kind of locked in, focused attention to a certain amount of things throughout the day, what things am I paying attention to? What things am I focusing on that are burning out that meter that aren't helping me do what I'm trying to do? Oftentimes it's things like that. You know, he was spending all of his focus energy on not being angry. And that became the game that he was playing. He was no
Yeah.
longer playing baseball. He was playing, I'm only focused on this thing because somebody yelled at me a couple of weeks ago. I think it's a good kind of story about what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely that aspect of being yourself, right? And it's one thing to be reprimanded by a guy like Veritek, who's like the captain of your team, and but you also have to kind of stay within yourself, but also at the same time be able and willing to grow. And like you just mentioned, the 2020 version of John Baker was different from back then, and so that's all we can ask is we just keep growing daily and just keep improving.
100%. You know, the Carol Dweck's concept of a growth mindset, I think is incredibly valuable for people, not just to digest, but to actively try and espouse. I know that for younger kids, I don't know it off the top. Oh, I do know it off the top of my head. There's a journal for younger kids, so like Little League and a little bit older, called Big Life Journal. And the way that journal is designed is to help kids develop a growth mindset. And it's effective. Like, it's a scientific kind of method of doing exercises so that you not only understand the concepts, but start living your life in a way where you actively seek challenges, see failure as feedback, look for things that are difficult to do, and cultivate the intrinsic motivation that we were talking about earlier to execute in your performance endeavor that you want to execute in.
No doubt. Well, Bay, this has been awesome, man. Very informative stuff. I find this just fascinating, learning how, because this is a completely new thing, that's happening in Major League Baseball and the minor leagues, and just having people to talk to. That was one of my biggest things, and a big portion of why I'm doing this now is being able to open up and just start talking about what you're going through, good and bad, and just learning about yourself, becoming your best coach, but also, hey man, I'm going through this. Like, what do you got for me? Can you help me out with anything? So this has been great.
And I think it's really cool. I want to tell you this too. I think it's really cool, like your kind of usage of Brian Cain's material is very consistent, because Brian was a protege of Ken Ravizza as well.
Yeah.
And I think that he's a good resource for people to check out. Obviously, you are as well too. And couldn't find I think a better person to start diving into this work and like taking it on as you, like having lived it, having experienced it, having raised like strong, healthy, positive children as well too. Like it makes me happy. I know that baseball is getting better. When I see on social media or I see on Facebook the stuff that you're doing, you're going about changing the game, I think, in a positive and productive way, and getting this message to as many people as possible is going to pay dividends, not financially, but I think for humanity in sports in the U.S. As we move forward. So I'm happy. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, man, this has been great. It's been great. I'm about 2 weeks into this channel, and just bringing up old relationships, bringing up funny stories. It's been an absolute blast. So, Bake, I want to appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on board. Now that you're in Phoenix, I think we're going to be hanging out a lot more.
Awesome.
And being able to hang out. So I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks, Chad.
Okay, we'll see you. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.